So, one of my Facebook buddies said that he enjoyed the videos that I put up about my kits and tuning and lubing and things. So I thought I'd do another little video this time about guides. So this is where I think I'm going to go with guides. It's a piece of seamless steel tube that I've machined between centers. I'm actually going to ream the inside out a little larger to about 10.05. I've ordered some new reamers. I'll do that once I've machined between centers to get the outer concentric to the bore, and then I can chuck that up and center it and send a reamer through it. But to explain why I'm moving away from these, this is a Delrin guide. And the problem with Delrin guides is they break. And they don't always break. They can just wear out as well. The spring can eat into the base down here, and you can throw a washer on it like that, which saves it a little bit. But in the end, they're weak. So with that, this part is a weak point. But I want to talk a bit about why these break. Now, normally they break here. The tube will snap off, and that's because I don't think this spring's going to fit this guide. It might do. No, it doesn't. Basically, if the spring is too tight on this guide, so it has to be wound on, and I used to make them like that because shooters like the numb, dull feel, the no vibration, it's tight. They like that. What happens is when the spring is compressed, the spring opens up a little tiny bit. So in theory, it goes loose on the guide. But when they decompress, and it's quite violent, remember, the spring decompresses very violently. Obviously, push the piston that way. It starts to close up again. And as it moves away, it closes. It can pull the guide. The spring can actually decompress from the middle, and it can pull, leaving part of the spring compressed at this end. It can decompress here and pull the guide off the trigger shoe. So there's a TX trigger shoe. So what happens is you take a shot and the guide actually comes off a little tiny bit, like, I don't know if you can see that on the camera. It moves off a little bit like that. So the guide moves off, and then as the piston stalls, like a shock wave in the spring pushes backwards, and the guide can go, but springs never decompress in a straight line. They always decompress on an arc. So what happens is the guide is twisted like this, sort of like that. But it's normally that way, like that. So the nose of the guide tilts up, and it's pushed back violently into the trigger shoe. Now it's so fast you don't feel it. Well, you will feel it. You'll feel it because the shot feel won't be as smooth. It can happen if you dry fire. It can also happen if you shoot a very tight or very heavy pellet. And the guide will go over and normally crack first, and then eventually it will fatigue around that crack, and then it will break. So some people get around that by making this flange in a separate piece so that the guide can rock. So in theory, I'll show you with the steel one. I'm not dropping everything. So in theory, imagine that's near the end. The washer, the guide can move. It has enough room to move. So the guide still gets ripped off, but because it can move, it doesn't break. It's like it works. It's like it's not the ultimate. Some people will put a fixed spring guide in there, but all that happens then. So let's say you've got a fixed spring guide in there. All that happens then, if it's too tight, is the spring will shoot forward and then resonance will come back and break a coil. It's normally about 2 coils back on the spring here, which can be a real pain. So the key is to not run guides too tight. Now, that runs a risk of you feeling some vibration. So you can see that guide there, this is just about perfect, this one. It just pushes in, there's no effort. It doesn't fall in, but there's no effort there. And when you put some good lubrication on here, the spring can essentially move up and down the guide very easy. And also, another key point is making sure that there is enough preload. Static preload, that's the preload in the non-cock position. So you want a reasonable amount of preload. You don't want to push that trigger shoe down in the action and it's like 3mm off the bolt lining up. You want 10mm, 12mm, ideally 18 to 20mm if you can. And that keeps a force on the spring. Excuse me, anyway. So, but if you have guides that are tight, which if this one would fit, if this plastic one would fit, it'd be really tight. That would be ripped off the trigger shoe. As I said, it wouldn't take much with the spring being so very tight on this for it to be ripped off and pushed over. So in the quest to make things last longer, this is why I'm going to move over to these steel guides now. This is, like I said, it's a reasonably high carbon steel. It's a strong steel. It's not been hardened. There's no need. That's a hardened steel washer that goes on there. And then there's a hardened shim washer, which is a slip washer that goes over the face of it. And that's what the spring will sit on. So ultimately, the back washer there, I'll get in frame. The back washer here is the bit that sits on the trigger shoe, but the spring actually pushes on the small washer. So if the spring does move forward, it should allow for that washer to have a little bit of movement. I've sort of envisaged that they will move a little bit in the hope that the odd time it does crash, it will survive. Now I've made these about 15.95, so they'll fit in, the air arm shoes. This one was quite a tight one. I actually did away with this one and fitted one of my shoes that doesn't have the safety holes in them. But the idea being that they should fit all the shoes, because this size of recess here differs from batch to batch on guns. They're never the same. They're supposed to be, but they never are. They're always slightly different. So the hope is that by moving to steel guides, and they're all coming in at say 14mm, or these are 13.3 for these springs. I will be able to center these up and then fettle them down the way. Obviously I can't add, I'll have to bin the springs. Each spring will be matched to a guide. But the idea is we should be able to match the guides. There should be enough meat left in the guide so that the guide will match the spring. And then it should be reasonably fluid, like this. That's the idea. So if you're running very tight guides, you might want to, unless you're running at extremes of preload, you might want to be careful, because obviously the spring can grab the guide and pull the guide off as it decompresses. But steel guides, hopefully, will last. But my fear is if they do get ripped off, which you got to remember, air guns are quite violent things. At the end of the day, there's always going to be something that goes wrong with an air gun. From the moment you start shooting it, damage starts to occur. It's just how long before something gets that damaged that it has to be replaced. My fear is, though, that a steel guide could damage something on the lip of this. Although these are hard anodized and they're very hard, 60 Rockwell. My hope is that it doesn't it doesn't wear and chatter and burr these over and do whatever. But at the end of the day, all guides move. Everybody's guides move. It's not just mine that break. Everybody's guides break. I think out of, I must have done 700 plastic guides, I've had about 20 that are broken. I think those figures are not bad. It's probably less than 20. I'm guessing at 20. Guides will break though. At the end of the day, when you think how violent air guns are. So try and remember, don't have your guides too tight. Something like that. So it's nice and easy. It just slides in nice. So in theory, even when that's decompressing violently, it can still slide on the guide and not grip it too tight.